Thank you for watching. Subscribe on Deceived Husbands for more stories. My wife Sarah knows me so well she can predict where I'll take her out to dinner. Though I've tried hard to surprise her, she has an instinct for when I need a little tender, loving care too. Sarah knows everything about my life, from awkward flirtations with girls in high school to the frustration of being passed over for a promotion I thought I deserved. She knows I'm scared to death of spiders, whether they're dangerous or not, and she knows I can't bear to hear small children cry without wanting to pick them up and comfort them, a trait I have because my father could never bring himself to hug me. Everything about me I entrust to my dear wife. She knows I always go to lunch at 11:30 every day because I had to take a lunch break at that early hour when I was the most junior guy in the office. Back then, I'd always be back at 12:30 because other people wanted to leave around that time. I got into the habit and never changed it. But today, Sarah doesn't know I'm taking a late extended lunch because the whole office is going out to a farewell party for one of the senior administrators, the director of the research and development branch where I work. John Edwards was retiring after 32 years, and the whole operation was being shut down to wish him a happy retirement. Dylan was one of the youngest engineers working in my division, and I was happy to have him under my supervision. He was a hard worker, imaginative, and highly resourceful. When it came time for merit pay increases and bonuses, I was happy to put in his name. With his first big bonus, Dylan bought one of those massive Ford Explorers. He had one kid and another on the way, so he wanted a vehicle big enough for lots of kids. Apparently, his wife felt the same way. Privately, I considered his new SUV big enough for a whole clan, much less one family. But he was proud of it and wanted to show it off. With my seniority, I got to ride shotgun on the way down to the convention center. "So, Mike, what do you think of my new buggy?" Dylan asked. "That's me, Mike Johnson, 35 years old, in pretty good health and well thought of within my field of expertise, mechanical engineering, though lately my job has had little to do with that degree. I hadn't been a manager for very long, but it was taking up more and more of my time. I was even thinking of taking some night courses in personnel and resource management to keep up with the responsibilities my boss kept pushing my way." "It's cool," I replied, injecting some enthusiasm into my voice. "Or is that supposed to be hot or tight these days? I can never remember what the latest slang is." I told him and he laughed. "You like it?" "Oh, heck yeah," I said. I twisted around to peer into the interior of the spacious vehicle. "Shoot, Dylan," I remarked. "I think the first apartment Sarah and I lived in was smaller than this." He laughed, pleased with my comment. I turned back around to face the front as Dylan braked to a stop at a red light. I saw once again how high off the road I was sitting. Dylan's truck, as he called it, gave the driver and passengers an excellent view all around, and even over most of the cars on the road. I glanced down out the passenger side window when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I was surprised to see my wife sitting in her 2-year-old Nissan Altima beside us at the light. This wasn't a part of town that Sarah would normally go. It was a long way from her office, and she rarely had to leave during the day. I was looking at the controls on the door panel, trying to figure out which one lowered the window, but it was taking too long. I started to open the door to tap on my wife's car window when I saw another movement. As I watched, a man's hand was thrust up her skirt so far, his wrist and some of his forearm disappeared. I froze. My gut knotted up so badly and so quickly I was abruptly deep in pain. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers trembled where they rested on the door handle. I felt disoriented. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch. I waited for Sarah to shove the man's hand away. Surely this was nothing she would put up with from any man but me. I found it hard to breathe as I watched my wife spread her legs wider, accepting the intruding fingers into her skirt. The guy she was with, whoever he was, had to have 2 or 3 fingers inside her. There simply wasn't any way that length of male arm could disappear under her short skirt without his fingers being in a place I thought only I had access to. "Please no," I whispered, but no one heard. "I've only passed out one time after being struck on the head by a baseball when I was 11 years old. I was feeling the same sensations I'd felt that day right now. My vision began to contract into a narrow tunnel, and a huge weight was crushing my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I'm a strong man, but the shock siphoned all my strength away. I was nothing but an empty shell. If I'd been lying across a set of railroad tracks and had only to roll to the side to avoid being run over by a train, I couldn't have done it. My eyes filled with unshed tears as I watched my wife of 8 years lean back to better enjoy this unknown man's ministrations. She never objected, never tried to get the man to stop. It came to me that this was a thing she'd enjoyed before with this man, a thing she wanted and was used to receiving. Sarah tilted her head back, her eyes closed as she lost herself in the pleasure his fingers were giving her. The look of lust and need for gratification shocked me. It was the same one she showed me when we had sex. The light turned green. I saw Sarah slap at the man's forearm playfully. She tugged his hand from beneath her skirt so she could drive, I guess. I twisted around in my seat as Dylan accelerated away from the intersection. I watched my wife's Altima as it made a right turn down a street that would take her back to where she worked. She'd never looked up to wonder who might be watching in the big Explorer. Not that she would have seen me through the dark-tinted windows. She knew I wouldn't be out and about at this hour. My lunch hour ended 30 minutes ago. She hadn't cared what an obscene, exhibitionistic show she and the man with her had put on for whoever it might have been. It didn't have to be me watching. It could have been anyone. Sarah had been so caught up with the sex play that she hadn't thought to conceal the act. Yeah, my wife knew me well, but it seemed I only thought I knew her. When she got home that evening, I got a quick peck on the cheek. A few years ago, my mind told me, I'd gotten long, loving kisses at the door when I came in from a hard day's work. Somewhere along the line, they decreased in number until they tailed off to nothing. I watched my wife as she started up the stairs. Suddenly, I noticed something missing. It hadn't struck me earlier in the day as I watched her perform in traffic. "Sarah," I blurted, "what the heck happened to your pantyhose? I know for a fact you put on a new pair this morning. How come you're not wearing any now?" She hesitated before proceeding down the hallway to her bedroom. She didn't turn around to face me for a long moment. "Oh, I got a runner in the right leg," she said finally. "It kept on growing, and I finally just took them off," she said. She grinned back at me, looking at me more intently than I think she would have under other circumstances. She needed to know if I was buying her explanation. I nodded understandingly. She turned away, but not before I detected a small look of relief cross her face. "I see," I said in what I hoped was a more playful tone. I hadn't planned to say anything, but a sudden surge of pain and rage had taken control of my tongue and made me ask about the pantyhose. The dual emotions still had control of me. An evil imp pushed me into seeing how far I could provoke my dear wife. "I thought some guy might have ripped them off because he was in a hurry to get into your panties," I said, studying her reaction. She was good. There was little to see beyond a slight stiffening in her posture. "What in the world brought that on?" she said inquisitively. I looked at her with as blank a face as I could manage. I refused to let the hurt and anger show in my eyes. I shrugged. "It's been known to happen," I said. "You remember Kate, that girl I had to fire last year after she got caught screwing one of the men on the loading dock? Well, I remember her coming back from breaks and lunches without her thigh-high stockings and pantyhose many a time. That was before I knew what was going on, of course." I shrugged and looked away, trying to project an image of a man remembering a painful event. Sarah nibbled at her lower lip for a bit before coming to me. Stepping close to me, she put her palms flat on my lower ribs and swept them up my chest in a slow caress before throwing her arms around my neck. She pulled my head down and pressed her lips against mine for a few teasing seconds. "Honey," she said earnestly when she finally broke off the kiss, "you are the only man who will ever rip my panties off. I thought you knew that." There was a hooded expression on her face, her eyes flicking from side to side as she searched my face for some telltale sign. She was gauging my reaction, hoping I would accept her explanation. I was willing to bet she was wondering how much I knew and what she'd have to do to deflect my suspicions. It broke my heart all over again. She'd been lying by omission all along, and now she was lying to my face. It was a raw, calculating thing to do, born of deception and reared by cruelty. I'd hoped, well, I didn't know what I hoped for. I guess I thought that if I got a confession from her, we'd find some way to get past this, even if I had no idea how. If you love someone, though, it's hard to let go without one last attempt. But Sarah was waiting for an answer. I'd been looking too long into her eyes for something I just this second gave up all hope of finding. "I know that, sweetheart," I said with as much sincerity as I could muster. "Katie's husband threw her out and got custody of both kids. She wrecked her marriage, the other guy's marriage, and her life, all for a little stupid, dirty sex out behind the warehouse." I let my contempt color the last few phrases. Sarah flinched slightly, almost undetectably, but her expression never changed. "Well, she deserved it," she said, and now the deceit was complete. My dear wife thought the rules by which other people restrained themselves didn't apply to her. I caught her wrists in my hands and tugged her arms from around my neck. I looked at her steadily, not saying a word, and then kissed her lips gently. Taking hold of one of her shoulders in each hand, I turned her around and slapped her beautifully shaped little bum. It didn't belong to me anymore. It no longer mattered that she didn't like even playful spanks. "Now go get changed. I'll have dinner on the table in 10 minutes, I told her. I turned away and walked into the kitchen without looking back. At first I had no idea what to do. I didn't have a clue what I should do. What was the approved reaction from a husband who discovered his wife was cheating on him? I'm afraid the company didn't get much work from me over the next week and a half. I would be working on something and then would suddenly find myself gazing into space, not knowing how long I'd been doing it. A number of the staff members asked me if there was anything wrong, but I always replied there was not. No one could help me through this. I'd have to solve the riddle by myself. I was able to reason my way through a few things. For one, the fact that the guy felt comfortable fondling my wife in public said they had been having sex for some time. If they were just beginning with each other, he'd still be a lot more tentative. It meant Sarah had been cheating on me for some time. I wondered when it had begun. I couldn't remember any signs that she was cheating on me. There had been no attitude changes or any modifications in our daily life that I could think of. In the final analysis, though, it didn't really matter how long it had been going on. The only important factor was that it was happening. Second, I wasn't going to put up with her infidelity. I was not going to go off to work each day wondering who Sarah was screwing that day. I wasn't much of a church-going man anyway, and there was no way I was going to turn the other cheek. It wasn't in me to do that. I couldn't see any point in trying to save the marriage. Sarah had broken the trust we'd built up over the 8 years of our marriage. It seemed to me she'd broken it a number of times, judging by the evidence, and I didn't know how it could ever be made whole again. The only thing that logically remained to do was to confront her and get myself out of this mess with my mind as intact as I could. If there was something I'd done so terribly wrong that it prompted a reaction like this from Sarah, maybe she'd tell me. I tried to pull my eyes back inside the windows through which I'd been staring blindly. I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The hurt came in cold waves, alternating with fiery periods of anger. Neither emotion would let me be long enough to do any productive work. Having decided that my marriage to Sarah was dead, I set myself the dreary task of finding some quick way out of my pain. The thing was, without proof of some kind, Sarah would probably be able to take damn near everything we'd put together. State courts are not friendly to a man making unsubstantiated allegations about his wife. I shoved what loving feelings I had left for Sarah behind a door in my mind and slammed it shut. I decided I wanted my share of what we had. We had some good equity in the house, and the savings account was beginning to show a nice balance. Finally, we both were making pretty good money and had been for a year or so we managed to buy some quality furniture and appliances. The cars had both been financed, but we'd been making balloon payments and the loans were nearly paid off. If I wanted my fair portion of what we'd accumulated, I had to catch her red-handed. I watched for an opportunity. On Wednesday, one day short of 3 weeks after I'd seen Sarah letting some jerk play with her, she told me she was going to go out Friday night with a group of her girlfriends for a few drinks and lots of gossip. It was something she and a half-dozen women in her crowd did every 6 weeks or so, she said. Janet, Lisa, Amanda, Tracy, and Kim were going along, but not Heather, Sarah's best friend. They were going to find all the things they could to talk about Heather behind her back. Sarah giggled a little about that when she told me. There was absolutely nothing suspicious about her doing this. She'd done it before on widely separated occasions through the years. I knew in my heart, though, this one was different. I couldn't see anything in her behavior that indicated she was not actually going to do exactly what she told me, but I didn't trust her anymore. I had to verify what she was saying. "Janet," I said cheerfully into my cell phone. Janet was one of my wife's friends. She and her husband Sam were occasional guests over at what had been our house for barbecues and sometimes dinner. "Hey, Tiger," she responded happily. Janet liked to flirt, and she took every opportunity. "What up?" she asked. "Not much," I said. "I was just wondering if you and Sam have any plans for Friday night. I was thinking the four of us might get together for dinner and some cards." She said in her mock seductive voice. "I'll have to check my busy calendar, big boy." There was a momentary pause, but not one long enough for her to actually be checking anything. "No, nothing on tap for that night, sugar," she said. "I'll have to check with Sam, but I think it sounds like a great idea." "What shall we bring? Just your cute little self, your better half, and a pair of bright smiles?" I quipped. I tried to sound upbeat, but inside I was dead. All the pleasure in my life had disappeared over the past few weeks. "Okay, hun," she said. "I'll give you a call when I know for sure, okay?" She paused briefly. "And Mike, me and Sam are sure glad you and Sarah are doing so well, sugar." I frowned into empty space as I listened. "We weren't sure after the Miami trip that you guys would be able to get things together, you know," she said in a more serious voice than I'd ever heard from her. "Miami?" I said, a little mystified. I thought at first she was aware of Sarah's fling, though I didn't have an inkling how she would have known. The trip she was referring to was one I hadn't gone on because at the last minute my boss had called, needing me to go to Seattle to straighten out a mess in the RD division of our parent company. Sarah, Heather, and her husband Tom, Janet, and Sam had gone without me, and by all accounts, everyone had come back with small winnings for once. Wait, was Janet saying something had gone on in Miami? Hell, she had to be, but I needed to know more. It made me sick, but I had to know. "I don't understand what you're trying to say, Janet," I said. Even I could hear the confusion in my voice. She was silent for a long time. "Oh, it's just scatterbrain old me," she said. "You know how I am." "Well, listen, I'll get with Sam and check if he's already got something planned for tomorrow or not, okay?" "Sure, let me know," I replied. She said she would. I got off the phone as quickly as I decently could. I was afraid my voice would reveal the pain I was in. Half an hour later, Janet called back and apologized. Sam had obligated himself to play in a poker game at a neighbor's house. Janet was just as sorry as she could be. "Maybe next time," she said. I agreed, regretting that they couldn't come. Maybe Sarah and I would just forget about the whole thing and try again at a better time. Neither of us was fooling the other. I knew two things now. Something involving my wife had occurred in Miami, and Sarah was not going out with the girls tomorrow night. I had to let the former lay uninvestigated while I dealt with the latter. I've heard it said that adulterous spouses get into a mindset where they conclude they must be more intelligent than those they are cheating on, simply because they're getting away with what they're doing. They begin to believe they are cleverer than anyone else in the world because they managed to deceive their marriage partner for a time. They begin to disrespect him or her and hold their spouses in contempt. Eventually, so the story goes, cheaters start making mistakes because of overconfidence. They don't think anyone else has the smarts to catch them. I didn't know about all that. This was my first experience dealing with such a thing, but I did know that Sarah was making mistakes. If I hadn't seen her that day with that sorry guy in her car at the stoplight, I'd have caught on to her activities eventually anyway. Being in public with that man was a bad mistake. Any one of our friends or neighbors could have been in a van or SUV beside her car. It didn't have to be me. Not making sure Janet would cover for her was another blunder, a major one. Second, she knew I was friendly with Janet and Sam, even more so with Heather and Tom. Whatever happened in Miami was almost certainly known by both couples. Either of them might have called me sometime to give her up. These were loose ends she should have tied up somehow. Her third error was assuming I still trusted her and would stay home like a good little boy while she was out whoring around. Her fourth was thinking I would put up with a cheating tramp of a wife. I smashed my fist down on the coffee table beside me, making the lamp dance around on its base for a long moment. Sarah was in the shower. She didn't hear a thing. I massaged my hand and wrist, seething inside as I contemplated my wife's betrayal of our marriage, herself and me. I was worried that my anger was going to take over my whole life. It seemed to me that my jaws were always clenched tight these days, and my pulse pounded whenever I thought of what Sarah and that guy were doing. I was ruthlessly suppressing those feelings when I was around her. It only made the rage burn that much hotter. The sad thing was that I was actually a little relieved when it became clear tonight was to be their next little get-together for sex. I hated to admit that to myself, but I was. Once I got through whatever I had to face this evening, I'd take what I knew and put it in the hands of my attorney. I had him primed and ready to file charges whenever I gave him the go-ahead. Sarah left a little after 8:00, just as twilight was beginning to make soft shadows all around. She thought I was in the garage, straightening up the disorder that accumulates if one doesn't give it constant attention. But I was really just killing time, waiting for her to leave. Now that the evening had come, I was anxious to get things over with and move on with my life. Sarah hadn't been interested enough in what I was doing to come outside for a look, much less to spend any time with me. I guess she was just happy I was out of her way so she could get ready for her date or whatever she was calling it. That was fine with me. If she'd come out to be with me, she'd have seen the rental Lincoln ID arranged for that morning. I hadn't wanted to park the shabby-looking wreck on the street. It might have been towed as an abandoned vehicle. It was a small lie, I suppose, hiding the rental's existence. That's what's wrong with lying and cheating. The lies begin to take on a life of their own and reproduce more of their kind spontaneously. There were 3 more lies told as she walked out the door. I wished her a good time, and we both said we loved each other. A man and a woman who loved each other wouldn't be doing the things to each other that we were going to do tonight, I told myself. I didn't care. When she was far enough down the block not to be able to see inside the garage, I opened the outside side door and jumped in the rental car. Driving away, I pointed the remote over my shoulder to close the door and sped down our residential street to make sure I didn't lose contact with her. Paradoxically, I had to slow drastically when I saw her ahead, waiting at a stoplight for cross-traffic to clear. I had to pull to the curb and stop for a bit, or it'd have gotten too close. As it turned out, following her didn't prove to be that big a problem. Like most drivers, she paid almost no attention to the traffic behind her, and even if she had, she wouldn't have known to look for a beat-up 10-year-old gray Chrysler sedan. She had no idea that her husband was in that vehicle tonight, trailing her half a city block behind. The light was still good enough for me to identify her vehicle, but it was gradually getting darker. It gave me an excuse to turn on my headlights. If she were to look back, she wouldn't be able to see my face past the glare. I followed her through thinning traffic to the far southwest side of town and watched her pull into a moderately priced motel. I quickly found a space across the street and parallel parked my ratty old vehicle. Getting my camera ready and trying to settle my jangled nerves, I watched out the driver's side window while my wife sat in her car for 5 minutes or so. It seemed she was impatient. She made a series of quick calls on her cell phone. Mine didn't ring. It was not me she was calling. A few minutes later, a big dark blue SUV came down the street and turned into the motel. I could see the driver was a male, but he was going too fast for me to get a good look at him. He parked beside my wife's Altima, and they both got out shortly. The guy had my wife in a tight embrace and was kissing her hungrily. After a bit, she patted his chest and pulled back a little. I bought a Nikon D7100 digital camera when I started planning this operation a couple of weeks ago. Even with my limited experience with digital cameras, it looked like this camera was going to be perfect for the job I had to do. I started snapping away, taking pictures of my cheating wife and the guy she was screwing. Though twilight was fading into night, there was still enough illumination under the motel's exterior lighting to light up both of them. The camera's 10x optical zoom, multiplied by its 4x digital zoom, gave me superb close-ups of his hand in her shirt. I could have counted the freckles on my lovely wife's face if I'd been in a counting mood. My only real problem was keeping the camera steady enough. I solved that by scrunching down low, rolling down the window, and bracing the camera on the 2 inches of glass that refused to disappear into the door. Neither of the cheaters across the way noticed me, though I was less than 50 yards away under a streetlight. They were awfully careless. I guess it was true that cheaters begin believing they don't have to take elementary precautions because they can't be caught. The guy produced one of those plastic cards with the magnetic strip on the back and opened the motel room door. He and my wife went inside and I settled back to wait them out. I wanted some pictures of them leaving the room to show how long they'd been inside. The camera had the ability to insert a date stamp on the face of the digital pictures, and the downloaded JPG file would show the precise date and time it was saved in the camera. I thought a computer expert would explain such things well enough so any court could understand it. Even if the judge wouldn't accept my explanation, I was sure my attorney would be able to find and hire such an expert. My stomach was churning. The bitter taste of bile was in my mouth. I was barely able to control stomach contractions that kept threatening to force partially digested bits back up my esophagus. The longer I waited, the worse it got. Abruptly, I couldn't hold it back any longer. I wrenched the car door open and spewed an ugly pool of nastiness out onto the pavement. The flood kept regenerating itself long after I thought I'd brought up everything I'd eaten for the last several days. After a minute or two, though, there was nothing more in my stomach. It got painful then. The dry heaves continued for another eternity before gradually dying away. I wiped my mouth on my handkerchief, rinsed my mouth out, and drank a half-liter bottle of water. Shaking with anger, humiliation, and a sense of loss so strong I could barely stand it, I stepped over the mess in the street and walked a few yards up and down the curb to see if it would help settle me down. I glanced at the room door, making sure they hadn't come out yet. I stopped in my tracks. There was only a dim glow coming through most of the drawn curtains, but at one place down low on the left side, there was a small area where the light came through more brightly. I was intrigued. I looked all around to make sure I was unobserved, then I crossed the street and walked through the motel parking lot. From a few feet away, I could see that my dear wife and the sorry asshole who was with her had been inexcusably sloppy for 2 people doing something they shouldn't. They left a space a couple of inches across where the curtain had not quite been pulled closed. I glanced around again, checking to see if anyone could see what I was about to do. I decided that I really didn't care what anyone else thought, even if someone did see me. This was an opportunity to photograph these 2 red-handed, and I was going to take it. I hunkered down on one knee and eased the camera up to the window, aiming it through the opening in the drapes. The LCD screen on the back of the camera lit up when I pressed the power button, and I had my proof. My wife was on all fours on the bed with a short, stocky man with blonde hair getting into position behind her. He was, I guess, the kind of man women thought of as handsome. He looked to be a little younger than me, but it was hard to tell. My hands were trembling too badly for the camera to focus properly, and I had to press the lens against the window. It took some experimentation to get a good series of pics. If I let too much of a gap develop between the window and lens, the harsh brightness of the lights out here reflected off the glass and tended to wash everything out. In a minute or two, though, I had everything I needed. Inside the room, I could see the guy beginning to drill my wife. He wasn't gentle about it, but it appeared Sarah had developed a taste for a little rough sex because her face was screwed up in a mask of lust and illicit pleasure. The camera could take 6 pictures in a fast sequence, and I put it on that setting before leaving home. I pressed the shutter release button again and again. I couldn't take too much of watching them. Still badly nauseated and feeling more pain inside than I'd known since my parents died, I settled back on my haunches and tried to get myself together. I drew in a ragged breath and closed my eyes tight to fight back the tears I refused to shed. I hurt, but a human being can only hurt so long before they shift themselves to another place. I pushed my emotions aside, damming them up and putting them back behind that door I thought I'd closed on them earlier in the week. Suddenly, there was no more love when I thought of her, and I damn sure didn't like her at all. My new remoteness, my detached view, gave me the strength to get to my feet without swaying or feeling sick to my stomach. There was a sudden flurry of loud voices from inside the room. I could hear Sarah, but I couldn't tell what she was saying. Then there was a louder shriek a second or two later, but it sounded like a man. I didn't know any men who admitted to being screamers during sex, but I guess they could. Anyway, the suddenly noisy sex play got me on my feet and moving away. I was afraid it would attract someone to come see what was going on. I started to walk back to my rental across the street, but I paused behind the son of a bitch's car while I thought for a long moment. I turned and walked down the sidewalk past all the motel doors. I looked carefully under the eaves, then stepped away from the building to examine the roof and every light pole in sight. I was looking for any outside security cameras the motel might have. I found a place down at the far corner of the structure where there were some unconnected wires and an empty mounting bracket, but I didn't see any cameras. I crossed the parking lot and stood next to the rental car, looking at the empty, abandoned restaurant. There were surely no spy cameras over there. There were some apartment buildings I could see on down this side street, but they were far away on the main thoroughfare. I couldn't see any businesses that would logically be protected by surveillance cameras pointed in this direction. I made sure the cap was securely fastened over the lens and put my camera in the back seat for safekeeping. Walking purposefully, I went back to where my wife and whoever he was were parked. I pulled the pocket knife out of my jeans and opened it while I debated with myself the wisdom of doing what I was thinking of. Then I shrugged and bent low beside Loverboy's rear tires. It took a stronger thrust than I thought it would, but I soon found the right amount of velocity and power to shove the blade deep into the tire. I was afraid my grip would slip and I'd cut myself badly, but that didn't happen. The hissing of the air escaping from the expensive set of tires seemed terribly loud, but no one came out to investigate. Encouraged, I took care of all 4 tires on his SUV, and then all of my wife's tires too. I guess it was a childish gesture. It didn't solve anything, and it very well could make it clear to the cheating duo that someone was on to them. I decided they wouldn't think that. They were too cocky. I wanted to do more, but I didn't. 100 years ago, I could have smashed down the door and put a bullet in each of their brains, and no jury would have ever convicted me. 200 years ago, I could have challenged him to a duel and killed him in front of his friends and family. Those were acceptable ways back then for a man to salvage his honor in situations like this. But we're so much more civilized now. A cuckold has so few options open to him these days. I did what I could, feeling a little better and not in the least guilty about the damage I'd done. I walked back to my rental and got in, slamming the door and not caring if anyone heard. I'd taken the first steps to rid myself of a faithless wife and regain some self-respect. There was little remaining yet to do. Monday would come soon, and I'd have a long talk with my lawyer. Sunday comes before Monday, though, and Saturday before that. Sarah came home well before midnight, pissed off because some asshole had slashed the tires on her car outside the club. 3 teens had been seen running away, she said. Then she'd had to wait 3 hours for the AAA folks to get there. Apparently, I'd not been observed damaging the tires, and someone else was suspected. I actually had no idea whether the 3 teens' story had any legitimacy, but the 3-hour wait sounded about right. I shrugged. None of it mattered in the least. I was surprised she was home that early, though. I thought she'd be out a lot later with her sex toy. If she was outside waiting for the wrecker for any time at all, it meant her tryst with the new man in her life had been a short one, not that it made any difference. I said a few consoling words to calm her down. She got in bed and went to sleep shortly after coming in. She hadn't wanted any cuddling. I knew why. The odor of cheap motel soap on her body was strong enough to make me gag. Sunday afternoon and evening, Sarah got very affectionate and wanted me close to her. It was impossible to tell from looking at her that she'd been out screwing some other man on Friday night. She showed no sign of feeling guilty about anything at all. If anything, she was more relaxed and pleasant than she'd been in months. That, I had read, was one of the classic signs of cheating. Whether they showed it or not, they usually felt some degree of guilt and would try to make it up to their dishonored spouse. I had talked to my attorney earlier today while Sarah was fixing lunch. He'd said to call him at home if I needed to. He was all set, he said. All he needed was my signature on the paperwork, and he'd file them at the courthouse before noon tomorrow. The pictures were bargaining chips if Sarah contested the divorce. Tomorrow afternoon I was going to be a free man, in a sense. The divorce wouldn't actually be final for 6 months, but I'd be separated from the woman who'd brought me so much pain. That night, Sarah put on a black lace nightgown she knew I liked and glided seductively across the carpet to where I sat on the bed. I didn't want her, not after I'd seen what I had on Friday night. I was trying to come up with an excuse not to have anything to do with her tonight. I was sick to my stomach again just at the thought of touching her. I sat on the bed and tried to look uninterested. She stayed with it, though, the very image of a loving wife who wanted some loving from her husband. She moved close to me, even though I didn't want to, even though I could barely bring myself to be civil to her. Her caresses were beginning to have a visible effect on me. She smirked, knowing the power she had over me. It pissed me off. Abruptly, I changed my mind. Without any thought at all, much less careful consideration of the consequences, I knew I was going to give my dear deceitful young wife the sex she wanted and more. It would be one last sex session before we separated forever. If I were rational at that moment, I would have known what I was going to try to do to her was rooted in my own humiliation. There was perhaps some arrogance mixed in also, but at the moment all I wanted to do was exact a small measure of vengeance for the disgrace that this woman had heaped on me. Carefully, I built up an image in my mind of a street hooker. I envisioned a tramp who deserved no consideration, and who was nothing more than a receptacle for me to use and discard. I would use her as I pleased when I was ready. But my revenge was going to be a little more subtle than that. If it worked, she wouldn't even understand it as retribution for a long time. I let Sarah's face blend into the faceless features of the tramp I had just constructed. Having dehumanized Sarah sufficiently enough for my purposes, I was ready. I stood up and pulled her close. I was wild and wanted my pleasure. I did the same. She was exhausted by the time I was done with her. When her body relaxed, I let her lay there unmolested. Exhausted myself, I stretched my body out on the bed beside my wife. Our only contact was my fingers around her wrist. After a while, Sarah rolled over and cuddled against me, putting her head on my shoulder. "Oh, God, honey," she breathed into my chest. "If only you'd—" Her voice faded away before completing whatever she'd been about to say. I didn't care anymore. I didn't ask her what she meant. "All you had to do was be here with me," I answered. I trusted it was enigmatic enough for her to remember tomorrow. She stirred a little, nodding her head as if in reply to what I'd said, and then she slipped quickly into a deep sleep. I got up and took a long, very hot shower. When I finished, I walked down the hall to the guest room and lay down on the bed. Sarah had not moved when I walked past our bedroom, her bedroom door now. I doubt she knew I wasn't there. She was sleeping on the wet spot, something that she did not like. She would be irritated when she woke up the next morning. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. I knew what the coming day would bring, and I dreaded it, even as I welcomed it, knowing it would bring me release from the demons that had haunted me for the last month. The next morning I was dressed and gone before Sarah woke up. I didn't doubt she was upset by my unexplained absence, but I had no desire to be around her. It was too painful. 3 hours after she left, I was back at the house with a U-Haul truck. I'd already delivered the camera to my attorney's office, and one of his assistants had printed 2 copies of everything. The sympathy the young woman felt when she brought them back into the inner office was evident in her eyes. I appreciated it, I guess, but I was suspicious there might have been some pity there too. I didn't want pity. At home again, and after a couple of cups of coffee, I got busy packing up my clothing and the few personal possessions I had brought to the marriage. There were even fewer items we bought together that I wanted to keep. While one of my original goals had been to salvage some of the furniture for my own use, I found I didn't want anything more than the DVD player, a 25-inch TV, and a few music CDs. Nothing else caught my eye. I made a backup of everything on the computer, opened the case, and disconnected the backup hard drive. I put it in my briefcase. I'd buy another computer somewhere to put it in. Before I left, I scattered a dozen prints of the pictures I'd taken last Friday night on the top of her dresser. I used the computer one final time to print my darling wife a short note in the biggest font I could use and still fit the whole text on the page. Enjoy the memories of last night, dear. They're the last you'll have of me. This was the second childish thing I'd done in the last 4 days, and didn't get any good feelings from this one in the cold light of morning, as it were. But I'd worked hard last night for the opportunity to say this to her, and I wasn't going to back down now. Taping the message to the mirror, I turned around and left what had been our bedroom, down the hall and out the garage door. I didn't bother locking the place up. It was no longer my responsibility. I thought once divorce papers had been served on Sarah, our attorneys would talk and work out the division of our property and other assets. Then I figured we'd sign the paperwork, go before the judge, and it would all be over with. Silly me. It seemed discussions between attorneys was necessarily a long, drawn-out process that became negotiations about the most inconsequential of things. For instance, I know the lawyers spent one whole lunch hour I paid for it. I'm sure on the question of whether I should return the TV I had taken with me, or did it constitute my share of the electronic equipment in the house? Who gave a flying... Well, anyway, it was taking forever. What it finally all boiled down to was that the house and all the furnishings were to be sold, and the proceeds divided equally, after the lawyers got their share, of course. Sarah and I would identify any furniture or other things in the home that we particularly wanted, and if the other didn't protest, that item was theirs up to a total value of $5,000. I didn't care. I'd already made my selection. I told my attorney just to get on with it. A few weeks after the petition for divorce was filed, but before our first court date, I went over to Tom and Heather's house to see if I could get some answers to the question of how this whole thing started. Heather had been Sarah's best friend in college, and I'd known Tom slightly over the past few years. We had all become very close. Heather had become as good a friend of mine as she was Sarah's. I realized belatedly that Tom and Heather had not come to our house, nor had they invited us to theirs since the Miami trip. Thinking of how Janet had spoken of Miami, I wanted to see if Tom and Heather could shed any light on the problem. They were outside in the backyard when I arrived. When I rang the doorbell, Tom came around the side of the house and escorted me back, handing me a cold beer before having me sit in the shade of a big pecan tree that was growing in the far corner of their yard. We sat for a couple of awkward moments. "So," I said finally. Heather burst into tears and got up to run in the house. Tom and I stared at the door through which she disappeared, and then at each other. "She's a little emotional sometimes," Tom muttered. "I know," I said, smiling a little in spite of all the pain everyone was feeling. Heather was upfront in everything she did, and I loved her for it. In many ways, she was closer to me than my deceased sister ever had been. I took a long swallow of Coors Finest. "Mike," Tom said at length, "Heather and I are just as sorry as we can be that you and Sarah are breaking up. But we didn't know what to do, you know?" I looked at him questioningly. I could see comprehension spreading across his face. "You don't know?" he said. I shook my head. He got 2 more beers from the ice chest beside him and handed one to me. "We didn't know whether to tell you when we got back from Miami or not," he remarked sadly. "We thought that surely Sarah would tell you what happened. It couldn't be kept hidden." And after a while it seemed she had, and the 2 of you had everything all worked out. "Worked what out?" I asked quietly. Tom took a deep breath and spent the next 20 minutes explaining how Sarah had gotten sloppy drunk the first night in Miami. Tired and mad because Id had to cancel at the last minute, Sarah had told the other 2 couples that if I wasn't going to be there when she needed me, she was going to find someone who would be. Sarah spent the rest of the night gulping down hard liquor while dancing and flirting with every man who caught her eye. At some point, Sarah and some blonde guy managed to disappear. Even with both of the other couples trying hard to keep track of where Sarah and the guy went in the casino, no one saw Sarah until the next day. That afternoon, Saturday, Heather and Janet had gone to Sarah's room and hammered on the door until Sarah finally answered. She looked like she'd been rode hard and put up wet, according to what Heather had told Tom. The blonde guy had been in the bathroom but had come out. Sarah had been defensive but also drunk and defiant. The guy had acted completely unconcerned about the whole thing. He left eventually, but since Sarah didn't join Heather, Tom, Janet, and Sam that Saturday evening, they were pretty sure Sarah and the unknown man had hooked up again. Actually, other than that one meeting Saturday afternoon, none of the 4 saw Sarah until late Sunday afternoon when she showed up at the airport to board the flight home. They hadn't seen how she got to the terminal, so they couldn't say her boyfriend had brought her. They hadn't cared. I didn't blame them. Heather had come back outside, wiping her eyes, and was standing behind my chair with her hands on the tops of my shoulders. Every so often she would pat me as one consoles an unhappy child. I'm not so sure that wasn't exactly what I was at that moment. When Tom finished, I sat looking into space. "I wish you told me," I said after a while. "I don't know what good it would have done, but some of the lying and the cheating might not have occurred." I sighed and bit my lip, but the damage had already been done, I guess. "It wouldn't have made any difference in the long run. How did you find out about Miami?" Heather asked gently. I craned my neck back to look up at her. "Y'all just told me," I replied. She was confused. "Well, how did you find out then?" she asked. I took her hand in mine and patted it gently. "I saw them in Sarah's car on the street a few weeks ago, and that blonde guy had his hand up her skirt so far I knew he had to have his fingers inside her," I said truthfully. Both their faces blanched. They winced in sympathy. "Oh, you poor man," Heather said. "You poor, poor man." She leaned over and hugged my neck tightly. I was stunned. "So it was Janet who spilled the beans," Tom said. "Yeah, she was happy the way things were going between Sarah and me since that trip," I said thoughtfully. "I thought she knew more than she was telling. I didn't know how much, but I thought she was leaving things unsaid." I didn't bother to tell Tom that I had known since our phone conversation yesterday that something had happened in Miami. He didn't need to know that I'd been on my way over here anyway. It was so convoluted it wasn't worth explaining. "Listen, y'all, it wasn't your fault. You did what you thought was best. If you had tried to tell me, it would have been my word against Sarah's. And what proof would you have had? As mad as I was about having to miss the trip at the last minute, I probably wouldn't have believed you." Tom and Heather both looked guilty. I tried to make them understand it wasn't them who did the damage, but I'm not sure how successful I was. We talked some more. Eventually, I got up to leave, declining their invitation to stay for supper. I could see they were disappointed, but tried to cover it up. I assured them that I wasn't disappearing out of their lives. I just needed some time alone for a while. At last, it was over. The judge banged his gavel, Sarah and I signed the papers, and I was free. I'd already moved into a one-bedroom apartment over on the south side of town. It was a crummy neighborhood and a dirty, run-down building, but it was cheap and all I could afford. Sarah got the house because she had the 2 kids. Wait, did I mention I had kids? Sorry, I have kids, a boy and a girl, now 10 and 8 years old. I tried hard to get the kids, but in the end I had to settle for generous visitation rights. I thought Sarah might have a hard time making the house payments. even with her income from her job and the child support I had to pay her. But the judge refused to consider the evidence I'd brought about her infidelity when it came to custody of the kids. I learned a valuable lesson from the whole ordeal. The person who's most skilled at lying is the person who comes out ahead. 3 months later, Sarah put the house up for sale because she couldn't keep up the mortgage payments and her credit cards. If she'd been as thrifty as she was dishonest, she might have made it. She and the kids moved in with her mother up in Columbus. I guess her new boyfriend didn't want to be around her that much. I missed my children more than I thought I could miss anyone, but when I tried to keep the house for them, they were nowhere to be seen. They were over at her mom's most of the time because she needed them, so what did it matter? I learned to live alone. It wasn't easy, but I found ways to cope. I joined a gym and threw myself into working out. The physical exertion helped me deal with the anger and frustration that still bubbled inside. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, spending time with the kids there. It was a way to fill the void left by my own children. Sarah and I communicated only when necessary, mostly about the kids. I kept things civil for their sake, even though it tore me up inside every time I had to talk to her. The bitterness I felt hadn't diminished, but I didn't want my kids to see that. They were innocent in all of this, and I wanted to protect them from as much of the fallout as I could. One day, about a year after the divorce, I got a call from Sarah. She sounded panicked and scared. "Mike, I need your help," she said, her voice trembling. "Mom's in the hospital, and I need someone to watch the kids. Can you come?" I didn't hesitate. Despite everything, my kids were my priority. I drove up to Columbus and picked them up from Sarah's mom's house. They were happy to see me, and it felt good to have them with me, even if just for a short while. Back at my apartment, we settled into a routine. I cooked their favorite meals, helped them with their homework, and we even had a movie night. For a little while, things felt almost normal. I saw glimpses of what my life used to be, and it was bittersweet. A few days later, Sarah came to pick them up. She looked tired and worn out. I didn't feel any sympathy for her, but I kept my mouth shut. The kids hugged me tightly before they left, and I promised them I'd see them again soon. As they drove away, I realized that while I had lost a lot, I hadn't lost everything. I still had my kids, and I still had my dignity. I'd learned a lot about myself through this ordeal. I knew I was stronger than I ever thought possible. Time passed, and slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I got a promotion at work, which helped improve my financial situation. I even started dating again, though I was cautious and guarded. Trust didn't come easily after what I'd been through. One day, out of the blue, I got a message from Heather. She and Tom were coming through town and wanted to catch up. We met for dinner, and it was good to see them. They'd been a solid support system for me, even from afar. As we talked, I realized just how far I'd come. I was no longer the broken man who discovered his wife's betrayal at a stoplight. I was someone who had faced adversity and come out the other side stronger. Heather noticed it too. "You seem different," she said, smiling. "Stronger, more confident." "I guess I am," I replied, feeling a sense of pride. "I've been through a lot, but I'm still standing." We finished dinner, and as I drove home, I reflected on the journey I'd been on. It had been painful and filled with heartache, but I'd made it through. I knew there would always be scars, but they were a testament to my resilience. In the end, I realized that I didn't need to avenge Sarah's betrayal to move on. My revenge was living a good life, one where I was happy and at peace. I didn't need to hold on to the anger anymore. It was time to let go and embrace the future. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life betrayals. What would you have done in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below.